Oh, Doreen, did you already?
The live stream.
Should I put the
Yes.
picture up? Okay. So let's do this.
And recording.
Okay. Greetings, folks. Really glad to have you here tonight. I'm Amy Antonucci, Chair of the Board of New Hampshire Peace Action, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to our Peace and Justice Conversation Series online for Monday, February 10th, 2025. Tonight's topic is Dynamic Community Resistance in West Africa with Megan Chapman. And tonight's program's been co-created with Peace Action Maine and Mass Peace Action, who you'll hear a little bit from a little bit later. We would like to start by pausing and acknowledging that we here in New Hampshire are doing our work on Nidakina, the traditional ancestral homelands of the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook people, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land and the water and those people who have been in relationship throughout many generations. Quick reminder on our Zoom guidelines, which have tightened up lately since we have had some issues with Zoom bombing. We love it when you keep your video on, but your audio will be muted to start with. You can use the chat to ask questions, and later on we will do hand raising and I'll call on people one at a time. That said, we also appreciate if you're willing to put your name on your picture, so we're sure that you're, someone, just makes us feel better, okay? And we really appreciate it, especially if you're going to be raising your hand. We do want a sense that we are calling on someone that is really here, if you know what I mean. Okay, so with all that out there, I'll say a little bit about New Hampshire Peace Action. For over 40 years, we've been educating, mobilizing, and organizing with the intention of building a more peaceful and just future for all. This series on Zoom started in 2020 as one way that we do that work. I want to introduce our co-host tonight. First, we have Susan Mirsky from Mass Peace Action. She's going to unmute and say a few words. Go ahead, Susan.
So, hi from the south of you all, south being Massachusetts and Massachusetts Peace Action. And this started this summer at World Fellowship. And if any of you don't know about World Fellowship, oh, this is the place to be. This is where lots of people come together and good things get started. And so this summer at our regional Peace Action retreat, Megan suggested a concern, and Amy and Martha and folks from New Jersey said, absolutely, yes, we want to talk about this issue. So thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Martha, there you are. Martha Spies is going to talk from Maine Peace Action.
Good evening. So my name is Martha Spies. I'm chair of the Peace Action Maine, one of several affiliates of the national group Peace Action. And we focus on two of Peace Action's 5 to 6 priority issue campaigns this year. One of those campaigns, a long-standing one, is entitled People Over Pentagon, Cutting the Bloated Pentagon Budget. We look forward to this program to highlight how money can better be spent in support of local poor communities. And I'm really happy that this event is being recorded because there are people on the streets and at some of the colleges and in downtown Portland right now. So they're looking forward to being able to view this again later on. Thank you.
Thank you both. And now I have the honor of introducing our speaker for the evening. So I met Megan Chapman, this past summer, as you already heard, at World Fellowship Center. She is a human rights lawyer and has worked in West Africa many times over the last 12 years, and you'll be hearing about that tonight. She's now the co-director of the World Fellowship Center here in New Hampshire, supporting progressive movements for social justice while remaining connected to the work going on in Africa. We're really excited to hear from her about the challenges and resistance there as we face our own challenges and mount our own resistance here. So I'm going to pass it on to Megan and take it away.
Great, thank you so much. So good evening, everyone. I think everyone's in this time zone, so good evening. My name is Megan Chapman, as Amy just said. I'm co-director of the World Fellowship Center in Albany, New Hampshire, just south of Conway. And for those who haven't been there, we do hope to welcome you in the future, this summer, or anytime you want to bring a group together. I'll say more about World Fellowship Center kind of if questions come up, but it is a place that brings together social movements and activists. We have a Summer Social Justice Institute for young people, young activists, that will be in its second summer this coming summer. And this is an opportunity for us really to try to build intergenerational conversations about the pretty enormous social justice challenges and peace challenges that we face as a country and as a world. I am going to be sharing tonight not about my work at World Fellowship, but about the work that I have supported, as has been said, over the last 13 years in West Africa. And just one kind of, I'll give a little bit of a bio just so you know who I am and why this person is sitting here talking to you about West Africa when I'm not from West Africa. But I was born, born in the United States, raised in the United States, actually grew up in Massachusetts. And spent the first decade or so of my career primarily focused on supporting immigrants and refugees. And I went to law school. But before I went to law school, I had traveled across West Africa and felt a kind of real strong connection. And so very shortly after finishing law school, I moved on a full-time basis to Lagos, Nigeria, which is the biggest city in sub-Saharan Africa. I'll say more about Lagos shortly, but I just want to give you a sense of who I am. I said I was going for a year and a half, and I ended up staying for 13 years. So it isn't that I went to Nigeria, a few times over the last couple of years. I lived full time in Lagos for the last 13 years, and started out with a local human rights organization, and ended up, because of the work that I wanted to do, which is really fundamentally hand in hand with urban poor communities, supporting community struggles, very bottom-up, grassroots-led, ended up having to start an organization in order to do the work the way that it needed to be done in partnership with communities. And so just over 10 years ago, I co-founded an organization, which you'll hear more about. It's called Justice and Empowerment Initiatives. We have operations in Nigeria and in Benin, so 2 countries in West Africa, which is why this conversation is broader, but we're going to get very specific. So in Nigeria, in 2 cities, in Lagos, which is the largest city in sub-Saharan Africa, the former capital, big port city, and then Port Harcourt, which is the kind of capital of the oil-producing part of Nigeria. And then Cotonou, which is the economic capital of Benin, which is the neighboring country. So just giving you a sense of kind of the scope, and I'll talk more about what we actually do in a minute. But as you can imagine, these are areas where issues of land, issues of urban development are on the front burner. And I ended up finding out very quickly that the legal skills that I had were only part of the solution. And we have had to employ many other strategies in order to support communities to face issues of mass forced eviction. So I'm going to go ahead and share. So you have the background on me a bit, and I want to share my slides so that you guys can start seeing some pictures as well, which I think will help us get the context. Now, let me just And I'm having an issue here. Let me stop that again. And get this back to slide 1. Okay. Just give me 1 second. All right. All right, here we are. Okay, and we are going to go full stack here. Okay, so the title here will give you a little inclination to the fact that of the many different strategies we ended up doing and using and continue to use to support communities who are facing huge threats to their basic shelter rights, to their basic livelihoods, and just their fundamental right to be in the city and to, you know, occupy space and to exist and to earn a livelihood. You know, very quickly we realized that using the law alone was not sufficient to support communities. We did support communities to go to court. One of the stories that we'll talk about tonight is a community that did go to court, but has issues that we are going to be discovering or seem to be discovering in this country, where, you know, court rulings are not respected by the executive branch, and therefore we have to resort to a broader set of tools. We've used a variety of different kinds of community-led research, which is framed here as participatory research, and participatory action research and participatory media to kind of really help communities to shape the dialogue and frame the conversation. So this is my opening slide. This is a community called Otodo Gbame that we will be focusing on tonight, and their specific struggle over many years, and just how dynamic the force of this kind of resistance is. And this is a picture that was taken when they were in the court seeking justice for a threat of eviction. To give a bit of context, I'm going to zoom into Lagos now. I've been talking about other cities. Lagos is the largest city in sub-Saharan Africa, about 23 million people, plus or minus a few million, because that's kind of how the numbers work. Census numbers are very politicized, but 23 million is a good number to have in your head. 67% of the people living in a city like Lagos live in informal settlements, in slum communities. And I don't mean slum in a pejorative sense. I mean slum as a descriptor in line with UN Habitat descriptions. And the community that you're looking here is the most well-known community in, you know, informal settlement in Lagos, a community called Makoko, which is also known as the Venice of Africa. It's a city, as you can see, that's built on stilts above a lagoon, and people move around in wooden canoes. So a place that's actually quite well adapted to climate change, you know, and it's one of the things we try to point out. But this is Makoko, this is Lagos, this is the context. And I just want to make one note, since I believe the majority of our audience is, you know, from the United States and coming from this context, and people might not necessarily understand the geopolitical importance of a country like Nigeria, but Nigeria is predicted by the year 2050 to have a population that surpasses that of the United States. So extremely important when it comes, you know, to geopolitical relations, even if they don't have the kind of geopolitical power that, you know, a country like the United States has population-wise. You know, the kinds of imbalances that we have in the world are things that we have to consider when we think about the long-term security and, you know, well-being of the population around the world. And I'm going to bring this back home to the United States and the struggles that we're facing at the end. But right now we're going to focus on Nigeria and Lagos. A city of extremes, as in this country, as in the world. Just within the city of Lagos, you have these massive extremes. So on the left-hand side here, you see a formal settlement. This was a formal, you know, a lot of the practices that we see, exploitative practices that are happening by the government of Nigeria and of Lagos State these days reflects patterns that were set up by the colonial powers. Of course, this was a former British colony. The left-hand side is showing what was a government-reserved area, Ikoyi, in Lagos. And you can see kind of the plots and the huge houses and the compounds and the greenery. And then on the right-hand side, you have a satellite image of an informal settlement where I personally have worked since 2011. It's called Otumura community, and they're currently facing an eviction threat as we speak, and many different activities going on to try to support them in that struggle. But you can see just the difference of scale. How many families are staying in the same sort of space of land, and it's pretty extreme. And this also relates to a fundamental question in urban development in places like Lagos, which is, who belongs in the city? Who is the city for? When you have, high levels of poverty at the national level, can everyone from across the country actually come and exist in the city? Is that the vision? Or, as you see here, is the idea that the city is really for the wealthy, and, the vision of Lagos that's often put forward is being the next Dubai rather than being Lagos in the country Nigeria. The main kind of core focus we'll be talking about today is community resistance around the issue of forced evictions. It's not the only issue that we work on, but it is a predominant issue. It's the issue that kept me in West Africa, because when I had been in my first job in Nigeria, in Lagos, for about 3 months, I was in a community called Badia East, which is the one that's pictured here. And I witnessed 10,000 people evicted in the space of a day. And I had been in a meeting the day before with the Ministry of Housing, who we thought might be threatening that community with an eviction. And I was assured that there was not an eviction that was planned, that they would raise our concerns with the Executive Council the following Monday. And the next morning, we got a call from the community that the bulldozers were there. And, this is the kind of scene that you had, and you had 10,000 people who were displaced in the space of a day. So this is the legacy of many, many years of this kind of practice happening, and a huge level of impunity. And as of when we first got to Nigeria and we were working on these issues, communities were taking issues to court and they were losing. There were just many, many of these examples. And so we started just thinking about what are the different things that we can bring into this struggle. I'm going to zero in on a particular struggle. That's kind of the broader context. This is a threat of eviction. When I say forced eviction, just so we have a picture, we're not talking about an individual landlord, coming and throwing out their tenants from, one apartment or two apartments. We're talking about, like I said, 10,000 people. We're talking about some set of powerful interests, usually a powerful landowning family, a company, or a government agency in their own right, that will employ the forces of government in service of those private interests. So you have to have this picture. It's an entire community that's on the chopping block in a day or two, and usually there's been some rumbles, some premonition that this might happen, but we're not talking about a situation where there's, proper service of notices and planning for resettlement. That does not happen in this context, or it did not happen as at this point. We've made a bit of progress and we'll get there. So going into this specific slide here, this is an eviction threat that came up in the year 2016. In October, there had been a kidnapping incident someplace in the state, and the governor, in response to the kidnapping, see if this sounds at all familiar, came out and basically said, to stop the risk of kidnapping, we are going to demolish all shanties on waterfronts across the state. And at that point, we could immediately identify at least 40 communities that we had already been working with the communities to gather their own data, to do their own mapping, to do their own enumerations, and start planning different development strategies to prevent eviction. And we could immediately identify 40 communities, which are pictured here, that would potentially fall under that threat. Within 7 days, all shanties on waterfront to be evicted. And so what happened? The communities came together. 40 different communities came to a community meeting. Actually, we were in one of the strategies we've used is training community paralegals. So we had community paralegals who were in a meeting. Someone brought the article that talked about the remarks from the governor and said, what are we going to do about this? And the community paralegals immediately said, we need to get our communities together. We need to start mobilizing. And so then in there, we printed out a notice saying tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, be at this address. and we're going to have a conversation about what we do. The community paralegals who came from all these different communities took the notice, went back to their communities, invited, the people who needed to be there. The next morning, 8 a.m., we had, 25 communities out of 40 that were represented in our office. And they sat down, they composed a letter to the governor demanding that the governor should retract the threat of eviction, or else they were going to embark on protests. Within a period of 48 hours, the government's threat was not retracted. So what happened? They went on peaceful protest, and there were a series of protests over a couple of weeks, which resulted in some meetings with the governor, but with the governor's office and some particular agencies under the executive branch in Lagos state government. But there was no ultimate retraction, and nothing was given the community's assurance that this was actually going to be an end to this eviction threat. So what did they do? They went to court. We went to court in a context where we expected we wouldn't win, but there had already been so much mobilization, so many people coming out, thousands of people at each of these protests, making a lot of noise, shutting down access to the state government in Lagos. And it created an environment where we were able to get an injunction. We got an injunction from the Lagos State High Court against the Lagos State governor and the other agencies that were involved. And that was, a huge success, as at that time. It was the first time in the 7 or 8 years that I'd been doing this work that we'd seen actually getting an injunction from a court stopping the executive branch. That did not, however, stop the eviction. 2 days after we got the injunction, the community members had copies of the injunction. They were pasting it up around the community, and the government basically staged what looked like, they wanted it to look like a community fight, but it was not a community fight. It was a bunch of kind of armed thugs from the neighborhood who had been hired to work together with the police and start creating a lot of chaos in the community. And then they started lighting houses on fire, using petrol, lighting houses on fire, brought in excavators like you see here, and actually brought a fire truck to station outside the community and stop anyone from coming in to try to rescue or to try to provide assistance and support to the community. And in that first phase of the eviction, which is what you see here, there were 2,400 structures destroyed, 30,000 people displaced, 11 people who died due to drowning because they were, houses were on fire. They had to run into the lagoon. Many people didn't know how to swim. This is a waterfront community. The 2 people who died from gunshot wounds will come up later in our story of this community, but this is a community that has a court order. They're showing it to the government officials, and the forces that, the powers that be are moving in. But it's also the same community members who, in the midst of this crisis, understood the power of media, understood, that they needed to get the word out, and they were the ones who took this picture. This all happened in the space of less than 24 hours. And this picture that you're looking at with a few others were taken by a community member who's sitting in a boat watching this happen in her community. And she sent it in real time to us. We got it out on social media. And the story started to reverberate because this is in violation of a court order, and it's obviously extremely violent to the extent of, people's houses being set on fire. And we had, as well, pictures of drowned bodies and other things that had come from this. I don't need to tell people on this call about the impacts of eviction, but I do want to just show a couple of images so we can understand, this is not something that was done with planning for resettlement. This is a different part of the eviction process. We'll talk more about kind of the stages, but this is, the kinds of conditions that children in the community were living in after the eviction. They didn't have any other place to go. There was no resettlement, so they're living in a cardboard box. I will talk later about what led to this, but we did have loss of life. This is a video that was taken by actually my husband, who's worked together with me doing this work, and he was in the community at one stage during the eviction process. He was with the community members in a wooden canoe, while the eviction is going on and someone got shot in the neck. And I'll just show this so you can kind of get a picture of. It doesn't seem like you can hear the audio, but there's audio. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to give like a warning of these things. The shirts that you see people wearing are shirts that belong to this social movement that we have been supporting, called the Nigerian Slum and Informal Settlement Federation. It's a federation of urban poor, who are coming together not just at the community level, but across communities to fight for their rights. And these are the same people who are, on the front lines of this struggle. The important thing to realize is that the eviction of the 30,000 people did not stop the resistance. It did not stop people from coming to court. It did not stop people from continuing to struggle. And this is the story that I want us to focus on tonight. There are harrowing facts about what has happened to this community and so many other communities like it. But the fact is that all these people, this is not before the eviction, this is after the first phase of the eviction. And what you see here is a continued struggle to protect their community, to stay on the land, to get justice, and perseverance and courage in the face of the types of violence that we're talking about. So inside the black doors here is the courtroom. The courtroom is already full. Every single bench is full. People are sitting on the floor. And finally, they said, you can't bring any more people inside. And so the rest of the people who had come to court in boats, from a partially demolished or mostly demolished community are sitting here waiting to hear what the court is saying. And these kinds of images were getting out. People were following the story. We started to get a lot of partnership, a lot of people who were concerned about what was happening because of real-time reporting and the level of mobilization. So let's see. So this is court case that continued after that first phase of eviction. Also, the protests didn't stop. The first phase of the eviction was the beginning of November of 2016. And this is, I think the first phase was on the 8th and 9th of November, 2016. This is the 15th of November. And the communities came out. They came out in bigger numbers. We had people who came all the way from Port Harcourt, which is like a 15-hour bus ride, to join in the protest. And just to give you a sense of the energy, it seems like the sound isn't working when I play this, but I do want to show you the footage. So these are people coming out from all these different communities demanding their rights. At this point, they're marching on the same state government that had carried out the eviction. And they ended up marching there, moving through police barricades, getting to the gates of the governor's office and shutting down the office for a full day on this particular day. And we had lots of international media there telling this story, covering. And here's the pictures of kind of bringing in the media. You don't get media on your first press release. You don't get this kind of attention on your first. It's when people see that people are coming out in numbers, they are fighting for their rights, they're not going to back down. Then it becomes a story, and the story starts to have its own momentum. It starts to have its own energy. And that's what we saw. We saw that, all these media houses started calling us and saying, when's the next court hearing? We want to make sure we're there. We had foreign consulates that were concerned, who started detailing specific officers, the special assistant to the deputy, the deputy high commissioner of Britain, for example, and others who wanted to be in the courtroom to see what would happen at the next hearing. And that's the kind of attention and energy that started to change the dynamics. And this is just, the kind of examples of how this works. It's not only bringing in the foreign media. In this case, it's people from the communities telling their own stories. I already talked about kind of the in the moment footage that happened, taking pictures while the eviction is happening. But we also started at this moment training young people from the communities, from Otodo Gbame, to be able to tell their own stories and start to push back on the narrative. If you remember, I said that when the eviction threat started to Otodo Gbame and the other waterfront communities, there was this kind of smear campaign. There was a kidnapping that happened in this other part of the state, and therefore we need to carry out evictions of all these waterfront communities to keep other people safe. And this is all a smear campaign. The government stopped at nothing. They said that, I'm sure people have heard about Boko Haram, like the terrorist group from the northwest part of Nigeria. They said Boko Haram was in the community. They said there were Niger Delta militants. They brought out all the horrors, quote unquote, of society and started smearing. And so the community members said, no, we are a peaceful fishing community. And they started telling their own stories, and we started producing stories. And that's actually where we end up going from here. I'm going to pause on this slide. There's a ton of information here. We got partners who came in wanting to support the struggle for justice, people with graphic design skills who could help us put together a slide like this. And I just want to kind of take us through so you can see a bit of the, how far we were able to go through this struggle, because it's really phenomenal. There were forces that you can see at play that were threatening this community, powerful people who wanted to take over the land for private real estate development, not for any positive development project. That was go back to 2014, 2015. The actual eviction threat, started in 2016. First stage of the eviction, as you can see here, November 9 to 10, 2016. And then you know what happened? The people didn't leave. Despite the violence and everything that I described, 30,000 people being displaced, about 5,000 people did not leave the land. They stayed on the land. They continued to fight for their rights. They started to rebuild because there was this shift in the balance of power. They had gotten enough support that they were holding on to their land. They had some structures that were still there, the ones on water, because it's much harder to demolish communities that are built on water. In fact, many of these ancestral fishing settlements that are built on stilts above the lagoons date back to the era of slave raids. And one way that communities used to keep themselves safe was building on top of water in the middle of the lagoon to make it harder to be raided. And so this is a self-defense strategy. And it meant that those houses were still there, and houses on land started to get rebuilt. And we even started to, come in and, with the different communities, support the rebuilding process, thinking that we could hold on. The initial injunction that we got at court in November of 2016, in January of 2017, you'll see it here, we got an interim ruling from the court saying that the eviction was in violation of the Nigerian constitution, the first time that kind of ruling has come out of a Nigerian court, and ordering essentially a ceasefire, ordering the status quo be respected, and ordering the government to sit down in court-ordered mediation with us and the communities to negotiate for an alternative solution. And so we were in that process, negotiating, talking about alternatives to eviction, talking about better ways of doing development, when the powers that be kind of came in and made their last moves. Later in March and into April, which is what you see here. But the fact that this community was able, against all the forces that I've just described, was able to hold onto their land, actually start to rebuild for about 5 months is absolutely phenomenal. And it should be something that encourages us. It encourages me to know that if we can just do a bit more in this context, we can win this battle. We can make sure that these communities stay on their land. The final stage of the eviction, I want to just share one story from March of 2017. When the government came in while we were in court-ordered mediation and started the demolition process in March of 2017, they didn't succeed in March. They didn't succeed because, once again, the communities mobilized themselves. The first day they came, they started to kind of, demolish some of the houses on water. They came in with something called a swamp buggy. But the communities came together. The women went out. They had a bunch of different kind of rituals and practices they did to build their own courage. And the women came out and they formed a human shield. And protests continued and other things. And they actually kept that demolition off for another 2 weeks. The day that you see here, the 9th of April, which is the final day of the eviction, this was simply an overwhelming of the power of the community, because of the level of the greed of the people that wanted to take that land. And what they did is they came in with more police than had ever been seen. They came in early in the morning before people would have been awake to be able to kind of mobilize and come out and block the demolition squad from coming in. And they set everything on fire, and people were not able to escape through the land. They had to escape in fishing boats out onto the lagoon. That's the picture that I showed earlier, the video. And that's when 2 people got shot, and one of them passed away, a young man named Daniel Aya. And I always say his name because it needs to be said. So it was a level of violence. People ended up in boats with all their properties, whatever they've been able to salvage, on the lagoon, and they ended up scattering. If you remember that map of all those waterfront communities, they ended up scattering to those different communities. But you can also see here that that was not the end of the struggle. 2 days later, it's actually not here, on the 12th of April, they were on peaceful protest again, and then they went back again on the 18th and 19th of April. They were able to secure a meeting with the government, and the government promised that they would be resettled, and asked them to submit a list of evictees. They haven't been resettled, but there was a promise exacted. And again, in June, we were able to get a final judgment from that same court saying that this was unconstitutional and ordering a permanent stay of any further evictions of any of the waterfront communities. That injunction remains in force up till today. And they also ordered that the community should be resettled. So hard to understand that this is success, but this is success in this particular context, and it's success because of community resistance. Massive community resistance, massive courage that can bring other people in to support. I'm going to talk briefly about the resettlement because we are in the process right now of trying to push forward the resettlement through the community's own power and then drag the government into the process. That's kind of what we're doing. I'm not going to read through this, but I've, just to kind of lay out, there's a legal and a moral imperative for the resettlement of this community that was forcibly evicted in violation of court orders and everything else. We've supported as one of the ways to keep the community coming together and as a sign of their tremendous perseverance and continued resistance. The people who were scattered to all these different waterfront communities and are living in challenging conditions have continued to go through a participatory planning process to plan out what they want their resettlement to look like, what they want their community to be when they come back together. These are just a few pictures of that participatory planning process. Just imagine the force and the hope and the courage that it takes to keep on doing this after you've lost everything. And this is the way we keep on, encouraging the government and saying this is the way that these things need to be done if you really want to deal with urban development challenges. Now I'm going to pause. You've seen the story of Otodo Gbame and the waterfront communities. You've seen the history of you've seen the planning process for the resettlement, where we have gone a little bit further than what you saw there. We have an architect and an urban planner who are involved, who are helping to kind of transform this into a vision that can be, implemented, where we can try to, crowdfund resources to support. And the other angle of our struggle, again, supporting communities to tell their own stories, is a film which actually premiered at Toronto International Film Festival in September this last year. It's called The Legend of the Vagabond Queen of Lagos. I'll screen the trailer if the sound is working. If the sound's not working, you should use your phone and just look at that, point to that QR code on your screen, and then you can watch it afterwards. This film was not made by professional filmmakers who came from outside to support the communities. This film it's a narrative film. There's a few Nigerian stars who are in it. It's a feature-length film. It premiered at, it's going to many, many different festivals around the world. It's, top caliber in terms of storytelling. The story was written by members of the communities, young people who've lived through forced evictions like what we've talked about and wanted to change the narrative. They realized that, if the government is controlling the narrative, they're losing. But if they can control the narrative, they can turn things around. So they came together, they wrote the story, they were crew on set, the second camera, the second AD, the first AD, all these different positions on the camera set were played by members of waterfront communities, including people from Otodo Gbame. And now they're touring around the world with this film. And I would like to play the trailer. Let's see if I can do it successfully. Just give me a second. And if the sound, I hope the sound will work. All right, let's go to it. Go.
Yeah, we're not hearing the sound.
Let's see. I didn't start it before.
Are we supposed to be hearing it now? Megan, we're not hearing anything.
Okay.
And it's
All right.
great to do Q&A anyway, so.
Sure. So I'm going to take us through the last 2 slides real quick. Just so you can see. So if you haven't gotten to see it, or since the sound wasn't working, just point to that QR code so that you can watch it at your own on your own time frame. And I just want to say a word about the impact campaign for this film. The impact campaign for this film, because it's not made to make money, this film is made to try to change the conversation, to raise awareness at a global level around forced evictions, to be screened in communities to build collective resistance, and to generate support to resettle the community of Otodo Gbame that I've been talking about. There's another QR code here, which takes you to another page that has more background on the film. And these are the ways that you can support this process. And I do want to bring it back to kind of the need for community resistance that we have in this country right now, in our current political situation. We would invite everyone here, anyone who has an interest. If you have a public library, you have a space in your community where you could gather a group of people to watch this film, we will come to you. I'm planning to be traveling together with a member of the evicted community and possibly one of the filmmakers from the communities, hopefully April, May of this year. And you can invite us to come and do a screening and have a conversation. The conversation would be about these things that we've been talking about here, about the plans for resettlement, and it would also be about community resistance. What lessons can we learn from communities like these as we face our own challenges and struggles, and find ways to bring ourselves together to fight the fights that we need to be fighting in this country. You can also volunteer in other ways to support the resettlement process. You can make a donation. Those things are here. But what we're really saying is we need to be having conversations about community resistance. And this film is a story of resistance. It is a lot of the things I've just shared, but it brings it to life. It shows the courage of the people who I wish were here with me tonight. It's unfortunately 3 in the morning in Nigeria, so not a good time to get someone on the call. But if you host us to do this in your community, you'll have a few people from Nigeria who can share their own stories. And I will pause there. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Megan. Can you stop sharing so we can see you and each other? All right. Thank you so much for all of that. Okay, so questions. We would love to take your questions. The chat is open, and if you use the reaction button to raise your hand, I can call on folks. I do have a question to start us off here. So this might be, I'm not sure there's an answer to this question, but I have been aware of the fact that there is a lot of successful nonviolent activism happening in Africa. And, here's another story of that. Now, I'm aware there are many countries and cultures throughout Africa. It's not one place, but there seems to be a motivation and understanding, a commitment to engagement and persistence that we really need to learn here. I think we could be better at. Do you have any thoughts on that, on what sustains them and what we might take from that?
Well, I think that's a that is the question I think we need to be asking, is how can people who are, facing the kinds of violence and challenges and like literally losing their homes, literally, at risk of losing their family members, how can they muster the resilience to be able to face this? And I think there's so many answers to that question. I think one is a commitment to engagement that you just cited. Um, People engage, my observation is that people engage because they have to engage and they have to negotiate solutions to the forces that are threatening them, because there's no alternative. If you don't negotiate, if you don't engage, if you don't use peaceful means, you cannot, you don't have more force, as in violent force, than the powers that be that control weapons and the government. But you do have a power in numbers if you stay nonviolent, and you have different ways that you can appeal. And I always say in our paralegal training, community paralegal training, we teach people like negotiation skills, but I always say, we don't need to teach you. You are negotiating every single day of your life. Let's just tap into those skills, and mediating disputes, because, you don't have the kinds of space, and you can't just retreat into a bubble. There's a conflict between you and your neighbor, it is right outside your door, or maybe even like the next room over in a shared structure. You have to kind of work those things through. And so I really feel like, if your vehicle is stopped, you're in public transportation, your vehicle is stopped by the police, they're demanding money, you have to find a way of getting through that, or someone might get shot. You have to negotiate that. And I do think that resonates with some people's lived experience in this country, but there's a lot of people who probably have this luxury of being able to retreat and just get angry about something and not actually have to push through those things. The second thing I would say is the strength of community. Um, it wasn't one or two people who went out and stood on the front lines to stop the bulldozers, in that community. This was all the women in the community, and the men were behind them, but all the women like took stock and said, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to come out. And they knew that if they did that, they didn't know what was going to happen, but they knew they were a lot stronger if they were all together. And when I think about the protests that are happening in this country right now, we need a major multiplier effect. If you see the kinds of things that are going to change what's happening and the direction things are going, we need to multiply by 10, by 20, by 30, by 40 before we have the numbers that are needed. And the last thing I'll say is kind of holding on to what are the traditions. In the case of the Indigenous communities that we've been working with, they have deep Indigenous traditions, practices that they tapped into. I watched them do this, bring out, traditional spirits, different kind of rituals before they went to the front lines. But we also have traditions, and, what are the traditions that make us stronger as a community that we can tap into and then come out? And I think we've lost some of that, but we can tap back into it. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Susan, is there something in the question in the chat that you want to relay to us? Susan's helping with that. Go ahead, Susan.
Well, I see something here from Emoji, which says or asks, what is the relationship between Israel land grabbing and what you've been talking about?
Thank you. I moved back to the United States about a year and a half ago. I had no idea that I was moving back at the moment that the kind of escalation of what has been a longstanding injustice, and longstanding pattern of violence, in Israel and Palestine, was about to get so much worse. And that has certainly dominated this last period of time. And I cannot look at what's happening there and not think about all the work that we've done, and the situation of displaced communities, and the sense of urgency that I know many people on this call feel is one that I feel so deeply, because I have sat with evicted communities. I've watched people lose everything. I know what it means for people to lose their homes in this real, tangible way, and be separated. And you have, some of your kids here and some of your kids here, and then you're facing tremendous violence. I think the simplest answer to the question is just that, you know, I was part of a publication last year about kind of like the forces of oppression in the world. And we sort of said, you know, feels like all these people who are, you know, perpetuating oppression and like stealing and grabbing are all talking to each other and using the same techniques and tactics. And that's because they kind of are. There's a very small group of people who most people in the world are tremendously good and care about other people. And then there's a small group of people who are motivated by greed and are willing to do just about anything to hold on to power and money. And, you know, I think these are the types of dynamics we are seeing unleashed in Israel, on Gaza, and in so many other parts of the world. And I do believe we're stronger, but we have to figure out how to be stronger.
Thanks. Susan, do you have more from the chat?
Mike Hui says or asks, oh no, I'm sorry, this is Bill Woodward, who asks, what does women in conflict zones refer to?
That's actually a question for George. Is George Friday still here? And George, do you want to, I can let you unmute. Here, I'm going to invite you to unmute and see if you want to tell us about that program. New Hampshire Peace Action recently endorsed it as well. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm so glad that you did. It's on March 19th at noon Eastern. There'll be 10 countries featured. If you go to that link, you'll see on World Beyond War, one of our sponsors, the countries and who's endorsed so far. It is sponsored by Code Pink, World Beyond War, International Peace Bureau, the Southern Anti-Racism Network, and an organization called CPP Ubuntu, which is about Pan-Africanism. So I'd say 4 to 6 countries on the list are in Africa. I'm not, you know, I don't have them all memorized. I know there's Cameroon and the DRC and Nigeria and Mozambique and Sudan. And then I start going somewhere else because Syria's there, South Korea, and I've left off 3 or 4. So go to the link, and if it's something you can endorse and you can encourage people to register and encourage them to endorse, please do. I did have a question, Megan, or a comment. It has to do with the U.S. people, our unchecked work around our own oppression, privilege, you know, whether it's age or sexual identity or gender or race or class or, you know, whatever. We contribute to that universal permission to not see another person's humanity. And I wondered if and when that came up, how would y'all deal with it? Because if nothing else, you get this, oh, you're from America. You're just trying to, you know, make us your charity. What you going to do about that? So I wondered how you dealt with it.
Thank you, George. And thanks for talking about the event, Women in Conflict Zones. World Fellowship has also endorsed that event. And I think it sounds like it'll be a great conversation. And hopefully lots of places where we can lend support thereafter. It's a great question. I think that as a person, at a personal level, I tried to always be very, very conscious of dynamics, places where I could use the many privileges that I have to support communities and help open doors and, you know, that kind of thing. Do that. and then most of the time get the heck out of the way and support the community in whatever ways I can. And I think that a lot of a lot of the learning for me was how to make sure that when we are having conversations, which we did all the time around way forward, what's the next step? It's like, this is a conversation. I am not telling you what to do. In fact, I don't know what to do. I can share a few ideas that I have, but at the end of the day, it is the people from the community, the people whose lives are on the line, whose homes are on the line, that need to be at the center of, like, thinking through, sharing their perspective, bringing their solutions forward, talking among themselves, and then surfacing outcomes, and then telling me, what kind of support can we provide to make this happen? So I never thought of myself as trying to save anyone, and I don't think that's not our role. I was in this, and I am in this to learn from people, to be inspired by the kinds of resilience and resistance that people can mount in extreme circumstances. That's been a journey that I've been on, and you have to keep on working on it. I mean, because there's a lot of forces that that are at play, but just continuing to come back to that humility, continuing to come back to trying to be in the back, or as invisible as possible, so you can just support the community process, and then seeing where you can add value to support a struggle that needs to happen, because I really believe if we can't get justice for these communities who are fighting this fight, we're not going to succeed elsewhere. So I'll kind of pause at that. Continuing journey.
Thanks for the great question and the very interesting answer. Thanks, Megan, and George. And we are very close to needing to wrap up here. I think that, in fact, I don't know, Susan, did Mike have a question you were gonna put out there as a quick one? Can you unmute and find us that? And then we'll wrap up.
No. His question is, did any of the displaced people have a certificate of occupancy? And how do Native Africans get the right to hold onto their land legally? And then another question, just to throw out to you, Amy, if there are other questions that we don't have time to answer, is there a way for people to put their questions to Megan after the program? But Megan, the question.
Yeah, I just put my my email, my World Fellowship email address into the box, so you can reach out to me there. And I also want to maybe tackle this question on participatory action research very briefly. Thank you so much, Mike, for the question about certificate of occupancy. I'm impressed that you're familiar with Nigerian land law. What I would just say is that in the legal empowerment field, which is the field that I like, the way I approach the law, I started out as a human rights lawyer, and then I moved into legal empowerment. We very quickly and immediately acknowledge that the laws are written by the oppressor, and our interest is basically to support communities to use the laws that help them to enforce their rights, and to also put pressure to change the laws. Changing land law in Nigeria is a very uphill battle, but the reality is that the unlawfulness that is constantly being perpetuated by the powers that be greatly outweighs any questions of legality of tenure status. And there was no legal process in the evictions that we were talking about to remove people from their land. In fact, what was happening was in violation of the court orders. So there are processes and procedures for securing one's land tenure in Lagos and in the other contexts that I talked about. But many times, even having your certificate of occupancy, the highest form of ownership rights, doesn't secure you against the kinds of dynamics and forced evictions. And I've seen that on many occasions where people who had their title documents were also forcibly evicted. So that's a quick one. Participatory action research. I didn't actually know the word. We started supporting communities to do house numbering, and to start gathering enumeration data to feed into planning processes to show that there were alternatives to eviction. And then someone said, "Oh, you're doing PAR." And I said, "Oh, great. What's that?" And we have gone on to use a whole broader range of participatory action research where networks of community members have been part of collecting data about a variety of issues at a citywide scale and producing reports that are have been used in like a C40 supported climate action planning process for the city of Lagos. Most recently, community members that we supported did a 5-city survey on the links between urban poverty and justice in 5 cities in West Africa. And that's the power of communities being able to collect their own data, do participatory analysis, and then bring the lessons learned out in basically most of what we do is try to demystify the different professional languages that are often used to exclude people from conversations. So whether that's law, whether that's research, whether that's media, we want the community members that we're supporting to be fluent in all of those languages and not to feel excluded or be excluded.
Thank you, Megan.
And I will stop there.
Yeah, we have hit 8 o'clock and I have just a few things to say to wrap up. And let me jump into that. So we'd love for you to stay in touch with tonight's program sponsors. We've got masspeaceaction.org, peaceactionme.org, and nhpeaceaction.org. And you can learn more about what we're working on, what programming we have coming up, and a few things that I want to mention. In person, we have our Ceasefire Now vigils continuing Wednesday, February 12th, 2 to 3. We're at Representative Pappas's office in Dover. Thursday, February 13, noon to 1, City Plaza in Concord, New Hampshire. Wednesday, February 19, 2 to 3 will be at Shaheen's office in Dover, Senator Shaheen. And then we have some Zoom programs on Sunday, February 16, 6:30 to 8. You're invited to a direct action debrief with the Mother's Day 5. And our previously canceled Monday night conversation about Israeli nuclear weapons has been rescheduled for Saturday, February 22 at 1 p.m. It's a strange time for us, but Alicia's back in Geneva, so that's what she can do. And our next Monday Peace and Justice conversation will be about community peacemaker teams with Weldon Nisley on Monday, February 24 at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Zoom. This series is free and open to everyone. That said, we are always happy to have your donations. I'll put a link in there. And then please just join me in a big thank you to our co-sponsors and to Megan. Some visible way of thanking her for taking this time to share this work with us. It's really appreciated, and we're really pleased that you came and spoke with us. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to New Hampshire Peace Action, Maine Peace Action, and Mass Peace Action for organizing this and for all the work that you're doing. You're an inspiration to us.
Thank you all. And we'll see you again, I hope soon.